Welcome to My Business Matters, the Michigan Chamber podcast.
Welcome, and thanks so much for joining us today on the My Business Matters podcast. I'm Mike Alaimo, the Michigan Chamber's Director of Environmental and Energy Affairs, and today we're going to be talking about sustainability and what Michigan businesses need to know or be looking at right now. We're going to touch on the trends, pressures, and expectations, as well as the opportunities and the challenges. So we're lucky to have a great resource in this space, Mike Troupos, a Vice President from Foresight Management, a Grand Rapids-based sustainability and energy management consultant. So let's dive right in. I know there's a lot to talk about. Thanks, Mike, for joining us today. And before we get a deeper dive into this growing issue, tell us a little bit more about yourself and Foresight Management.
Yeah, you bet, Michael, and thanks for having me on. So, Mike Troupos went to Calvin College and studied engineering and finished my degree with a civil engineering major and graduated in the recession. And there weren't a whole lot of jobs because people weren't really building anything. So I kind of fell into the industry. Back then, it was really energy focused. And I actually started at Foresight. I was a lifer, so I was the fourth employee there. We've since grown to 50, and I've been with the company for about 11 years now and really just fell in love with both energy and sustainability. So, Foresight is, like you said, a firm here in Grand Rapids, Michigan, but we are consulting mostly with industrial manufacturing companies across not only Michigan, but the Midwest and even the U.S., and many of our clients have a global footprint, and we're helping them make progress on their energy and sustainability journey. There's a lot of complexity in both of those topics that we'll talk about, but basically we exist to help them navigate that pathway and make progress on their journey.
That's fantastic. And it is a complicated and nuanced issue, and we will be getting into that more in a little bit. But first, sustainability obviously is a trend that is here to stay and seems to only be increasing. The expectation as to whether it's coming from shareholders, investors, suppliers, customers, or employees, that companies are quote unquote sustainable. But what does that mean? How do we define sustainability from your point of view, and what should Michigan businesses of all sizes and types have on their radar screens if it isn't already?
Absolutely. We get asked this all the time, and often when people ask this similar to you, they say sustainability, and I'm hearing the term ESG, or environmental social governance. What are these and how do I think about them? And so I always like to make things as easy as possible. So when I think about sustainability, I always say it's leaving something better than you found it. It really doesn't have to be more complicated than that. If we did that with our air, with our water, with the chemicals that we use, et cetera, then I would argue that's sustainable. Certainly there's fancy definitions that talk about things going on into perpetuity, but sustainability, I would argue, is a much broader term than something like ESG, where you have environmental, social, and governance. That was driven more by Wall Street, and a lot of these analysts set metrics for environmental, social governance, provided a score, threw it in a blender and put it out there. And so, again, when I think about it, a lot of our privately held businesses typically lean more towards talking about things in a sustainability lens. And a lot of our publicly traded clients or clients who are maybe PE owned often live more in the ESG side of it. But again, I would say they're two sides of the same coin. A lot of overlap, but there definitely is some differences as well.
Yeah, I love that differentiation, and I think it's something that is so important to highlight because we do hear a lot about ESG, and I think it is an important topic that probably deserves its own time on the podcast here. But sustainability is really, seemed to like the quantitative versus the qualitative aspect of processes improvement and things of that nature, which can be daunting and overwhelming for businesses, right? They hear these broad strokes, they hear these acronyms and other things that don't necessarily hold meaning to an average business owner that's just trying to stay afloat or effectuate his bottom line. So especially for smaller employers, where do they start? What have you found works best?
Yeah, so I generally say you can't manage what you don't measure. And so often we're suggesting that organizations begin their sustainability journey on collecting relevant metrics. And so what I'm getting at for relevant metrics would be things like your electricity consumption, your natural gas consumption, water, the waste that you're paying to have hauled away from your facility. Those four are really the main areas you can start. And then the beauty, Michael, is often, we can translate things like electric and natural gas into carbon reductions, which is the sustainability story. But who are we kidding? Again, Foresight's been around for 15 years. The first really 10 to 12 years, this was a cost story. If you actually think about it, if you can reduce the amount of money you spend on your electric, on your gas, on your water, and on your waste, ultimately you're also reducing the amount of greenhouse gas emissions that your company generates. So one, I would argue you should start by tracking that stuff and managing it, really, instead of treating it like an overhead, saying, no, we can reduce our costs either by efficiency or proactive management. And then two, the beauty of that is, if you can enjoy those cost savings, which I think every business we've found would love to spend less on their utilities, you also then have that compelling story around greenhouse gas emissions reduction. So it's hand in hand, but it's often like when you're talking to the financial person, talking in the terms of dollars, and when you're talking to maybe the sustainability person or investor relations, et cetera, translating that over into carbon. And then you can get a value alignment across the whole different stakeholders that you have at an organization.
Yeah, and I love that last part about, kind of value alignment. And that can be challenging, right, for especially large businesses or maybe small and large, where there's just a disconnect between maybe what one department is charged with doing or what leadership, takes on as a new priority. And it's tough maybe to translate that into, operational success. So I'm assuming that's where Foresight in some way, comes in, and can you talk a little bit about what that looks like on maybe a first and second meeting with a potential client?
You got it. And you're exactly right. So once you have that baseline, once you've started collecting the data, then the fun begins. Obviously, collecting data isn't where a lot of our clients derive joy. A lot of the joy, to your point, comes from then improving. And so, often the discussion revolves around each of those metrics. So we'll just pick electricity, it's often understanding, well, what systems in your facilities are consuming the most electricity? Again, we're often dealing with industrial manufacturing, and they have a lot of equipment building the parts that we all need for our cars and for our computers and our houses, et cetera. And so, drilling down on that, understanding how that equipment functions, and then looking to see if there's opportunities for maybe new equipment that's more efficient or a better way to control your existing system, that those all can be valuable. And then on the institutional side, maybe you just have office buildings. You're more of a knowledge economy business. Then understanding, are you controlling your HVAC, your heating and cooling system? Is it turning off on nights and weekends when no one's in the building? Are you setting the thermostat at the right temperatures? There's a lot of different ways you can go about investing in the actual energy consuming systems within your organization and finding the efficiency. And then the joy is, you had that baseline, right? We started collecting that data like I talked about in phase one. Then when you do those projects, you can say, hey, look, we actually saw this reduction. We made these investments and we got the benefit associated with them. So it's that process of, if you don't have that first step, it can be harder to quantify the benefits associated in those following steps.
Yeah, absolutely. That's fascinating. And I love the idea that you're kind of pulling together a suite of options for businesses and business owners to kind of look at the different ways they could take this, right? And maybe it's all of them over time, but you have to start somewhere.
Certainly.
I want to talk about triple bottom line, because it is such a talked about and utilized term, and frankly probably overutilized, at least in some circles. But I think it still holds a lot of value in these specific discussions when you're talking about why should a company take the time, take the effort, right? This isn't fundamental to a lot of companies' goals, at least not up front. Maybe it should be. But, what does triple bottom line kind of mean from your perspective here? And is that formula to sustainability, is that approach to sustainability a successful business strategy in your mind?
Yeah, absolutely. And Michael, I actually want to propose a different way for the listeners here to think about that. So you're exactly right. And the triple bottom line is talked about frequently as kind of what I've been just talking about here the last number of minutes, which is if I can reduce my spend, that helps my bottom line. And that's not wrong. And again, that certainly works towards the triple bottom line. But what I'm finding is the companies here in Michigan and beyond that are winning here in 2023 are taking a little bit of a different approach to the triple bottom line. And let me give you a story of a tier one automotive manufacturer that's headquartered here in the state of Michigan. And they were doing a lot of business with Ford, but they hadn't really done a whole lot of business with General Motors. And we were working with them, helping them do stuff. And by the way, they don't even have an on-staff sustainability person. They were basically leveraging our services. And they came to us and said, hey, we want to start talking to General Motors. Can you do some research and help us understand what their goals are around sustainability? And so we helped them do some research, and certainly they were doing a lot of the other things I just talked about. Well, long story short, they found out that General Motors came out with a climate pledge, and they were one of the first companies to sign that climate pledge. And this was 18 months ago or so. And sure enough, about 6 months ago, they let us know that they won a huge contract with General Motors. And they basically said, in a world where you know how these standard things you're competing on price and quality and when you can get it to a customer, right? Those are the big things. And I'm not going to tell you that those aren't anymore. What I am going to say, though, is in an increasingly competitive economy, everyone is really similar on those. And so they believe that because they were one of the first signatories to this thing and they're helping General Motors meet their climate goals, they believe they want a huge order. And so that's how I would encourage you to rethink the triple bottom line is not only like I'm cutting my costs, but in many regards, I can run a flourishing business by differentiating myself from my competitors by investing in sustainability.
You know, I think that is a phenomenal example, and it is different than I think a lot of people think of it. I think a lot of people think of it as kind of internal or inward facing to the company's overall, you know, operations or processes, and kind of looking at, okay, how do we do, you know, more with less or something along those lines.
Absolutely.
But what you're talking about is kind of, you know, you're allowing a company to in some ways, kind of reshape itself in how it is viewed by its vendors, by, you know, the competitive marketplace it's competing in, and really, you know, drive forth a different value proposition than they had previously.
Yeah, you got it, Michael. And that is a huge way to rethink. And I think COVID really pushed a lot of businesses to do that. Innovation is something that sounds cliche, but the reality is if you can take the time to understand where the marketplace is moving and get there before your competitors, that's your competitive advantage. Like I said, I think the free flow of information is resulting in a lot of these companies struggling to meaningfully differentiate themselves on some of those standard purchasing decision things like cost. And you know, I'm talking about this in a business standpoint, but we're seeing this, you think about this at the grocery store. Like me and my family, we're willing to pay that premium for an organic piece of fruit because, you know, we have little kids and we want them to be able to eat the best. And so if you can demand that green premium and explain to the marketplace why you're different than your competitors, I really think that is how you will flourish, and the triple bottom line will work for you in the next number of years.
Absolutely. Reminds me of a conversation I just had with my wife about pasteurized milk and how I'm willing to pay more for you know, higher quality product in that space. But I think that's spot on. You know, I think it does kind of segue us into, you know, we've talked a lot about kind of, okay, we've got a company that's at least at the point of being interested, or at least at the point of asking maybe the right questions. What about a company that, you know, really hasn't to date, you know, looked at this and maybe doesn't feel a particular motivation to do something on that, or is wondering why they should do this? You know, are there some key questions that Michigan companies should be asking themselves, or key trends that they should be paying attention to?
Definitely, and I may sound like a little bit of a broken record here, but a lot of it is going to your customers and understanding what they care about. So again, if you're selling to end consumers like you and me, then just understanding, you know, as my demographic, millennials and Gen Z, I probably should have something to say about sustainability, about the impact of this product, about how we care about the community, because that's stuff that resonates. I'm a millennial, and I know that resonates with a lot of millennials and Gen Z. And then certainly, like I mentioned, if you're a business selling to other businesses, I get it. Like if none of your customers are asking for this, you may be a little less inclined to make those investments. And we're still hearing that from some manufacturing companies very, very far down in the supply chain. And I always tell them, hey, if you don't feel the pressure, like, we're not twisting anyone's arms, but you certainly should understand that the companies living above you that are buying your raw materials are starting to feel it, and so you should just be mindful of the fact that this could be coming. But certainly all the rest of the industrial or manufacturing or just business-to-business organizations here in Michigan, I would just encourage them to listen to their customers and ask them, do you care? And in sustainability, like we talked about, like, we're hearing more and more about, like, conflict mineral policies or anti-money laundering or anti-slavery policies. So making sure that you understand what's important to your customers, and then making sure that you have the capacity and ability as an organization to then set a plan around, making those changes to your organization so you can better align. It's really looking at all of your stakeholders and understanding what they care about so that you can have a flourishing business.
That's great, Mike. Phenomenal insights all around, and really appreciate your time today. Unfortunately, we are out of time. And a very special thanks to the other Mike with Foresight Management, and to you all for listening. Make sure you tune in to our next episode. Until then.